Today is Wednesday, December 18. It's about 5:10 in the evening, and this is not my usual entrance to do astro, nor is this equipment set my usual equipment set. And the reason is I am located in Tucson, Arizona, and I'm going to give you an overview to what I'm doing this evening. The project I'm specifically on, regardless of the equipment set, is if you sight along this building right here at about an angle right about there, you would normally pick out Polaris. So finally, I'll get an opportunity to do some imaging in the circumpolar sky. But I also need to characterize a different equipment set. And this equipment set at this time, because I'll be upgrading to a 6-inch Quattro Newtonian with a combo corrector in the next week or two, is my old pup, the ST80. I did get out last night and verify everything worked. I did not achieve a really good alignment with the mount, and I will explain that to you in a little bit. But first I want to show you the componentry. To do imaging the way many modern imagers are now doing, not Revolution 2, you would get a ZWO unit. And there's our ZWO unit right there. They're pretty expensive. I can't quote you exactly, but I think I paid about $700 for it, which is twice the cost of a Rev 2 unit, but is supposed to give noticeably superior results. Ordinarily, you would get a ZWO unit like this and hook it up to an ASI Air Plus unit such as this. It basically acts as a local area network broadcaster, or hotspot, if you will. And it would mount right where the finder scope is on the pup, ST80. And what you would do is use these cables, which includes a power cable, which goes to the cooling unit on the ZWO unit, and the signal cable, which fits into this slot right here. And then, by providing power to it for cooling, fan and cooler, and also providing power through this USB 3 cable, which has a very intriguing termination on it, the imaging system right here, the ZWO unit, would then be able to capture images, cool itself, which is very important for image stability and background noise, cool itself, and forward a signal to the ASI Air unit, which then would use what I'm not showing here is a little antenna to broadcast itself as though it were a local area network hub. And then you would detect it on your computer, and this is a Microsoft version 11. You would look right about here, and if it were operating, you would detect it, because I do not have a connection in my backyard. You would connect it up using the standard managed Wi-Fi connections basically interface. All right. So, and then it would project a signal which would then enter into the software associated with the ZWO unit, which you can configure in various ways to begin with, depending upon your object studies, and then you'd be able to capture images onto your laptop. Except there's one problem. This basically works with a cell phone that uses, or a Apple unit, and I do not have that here, nor do I want to image deep sky studies on a cell phone. So I'm instead going to connect a cable which routes from the ZWO unit here into a USB port on the side of the laptop, and then using the software be able to actually show the images on the screen, except for one problem. The screen must be local to the unit located on the scope. So for the time being, that's the way all this is configured. There are other factors as well you need to provide power to the mount, and this is an EQ 6R Pro mount. You have to provide it with 12 volts power, and you have to have a hand controller, which is located here in order to configure everything and drive the go-to unit. However, the Syscan unit does not have an internal database, nor does the mount that tells you anything about what you're studying, that I can tell, other than the fact that you can navigate to it once you've done a 2 or 3 star alignment with the mount, which is actually far more robust than anything you'd need for an ST80 Orion. All right, some other items of interest. Because I have no data accessibility and I have no access to the internet on the laptop, I am making reference to the Astro Geekjoy Deep Sky Atlas, published by Golden Phoenix Publish, to be able to come up with a list of studies and not have to navigate to them because GoTo is present on the EQ6R. However, I do have to know what I'm looking for. Meanwhile, because I am accustomed to quoting data that is provided by my Gemini 2 handset, I am going to have to make reference to pre-research data about the various studies we'll see tonight. All right, so that means I'm going to have some luminosity available to me to read this text, which is written in a fairly poor pen when I have available to me. All right, and as mentioned, we will go circumpolar with the exception of the Messier 31, 110, and 32, which I want to use as a baseline to see how well the ST80 and ZWO combination is able to image. Finally, we are in Tucson. There's plenty of lighting around here, so we are going to see image degradation. I have been told that the night seeing on the weather on NPR, the weather is supposed to be very nice tonight, but I want to show you what the atmosphere looks like down low. So if I lift my camera up, you can see there's a band of yellowish, thick atmosphere that extends maybe 10, 20 degrees above the horizon, and then overhead it gets progressively darker. Don't be fooled by how dark it looks in the camera. It is actually fairly light with some humidity, and then proceeds to the south here. And because I have the side of the condo complex before me, I will not be able to see anything ascending until it probably gets at least well into the sky's middle third. But I will be focusing, because I can't do it in John Day, on circumpolar studies. As I mentioned before, required a great deal of research before I could actually gather all the data I wanted to be able to record to this camera. Finally, notice something. This camera, I basically cannibalized a tiny mic stand, so it's now sitting perfectly flat on the coffee table before me. And you can see the interface used by the ZWO camera. I'll push it back just a little bit. I'll center it up, and I assume that I will be able to expand any screen I want. For instance, the planetary screen, which you can see I'm opening now, but it won't display anything full size. The reason there's no camera driver yet is because I have yet to hook up the cables necessary to interface to the ZWO unit to the laptop. We'll look at this a little bit more later. Okay, I've now connected the USB 3 termination to the USB port, standard USB port on the side of the laptop. Meanwhile, I have provided power from this power unit right here, which I purchased along with everything else that I've already described as new acquisitions, to the camera itself to drive the cooling system. So imaging power comes in through the USB 3, and power to drive the cooling system, which has a little LED light that shines consistently once it works, is being provided by a 12-volt DC power supply, which is matched in load to the ZWO camera. By the way, if you're interested, this is an ASI 533 MC Pro camera, and that's what I'll be using while here. And after I've completed the Revolution 2 tour of the NGC catalog, I may very well switch over to this if I can get superior results in real-time deep sky imaging. Okay, now let's watch as I open the ASCP. Notice we now have a camera designation right up here on the screen. And to activate it, all I have to do is press the arrow button beside it. Now we have the screen. The ZWO unit I purchased has a square screen image, not a rectangular. Rectangular would be better for real-time imaging because it'll fit the format of YouTube, etc., etc. But the square image also gives a wider field of view. Now, this is because it's square, but there are other factors involved here. This screen image, as you can see, if you look right over here, is a little more than 3,000 by 3,000 pixels in resolution. Now, I've calculated that out based on looking at Epsilon Lyrae last night, knowing the separation between the primary bright stars in the double star, and I figured out that we basically got more than 50 arc minutes of field of view each direction on this screen. And that's based on the fact that we are using an ST80 without any kind of reducing Barlow, and it is an f5, so therefore it has 400 millimeters focal length. I went on to calculate that once I get the Quattro unit, which is f4 but also 150 millimeters, that I should be getting about 35 arc minutes. So I should be able to encompass the entire full moon, irrespective of whether it's in perigee or apogee, further or closer to the Earth. So what I'm excited about in this terms is this imaging format should roughly be equivalent to the digitized sky survey images that were taken back in the late 1940s, and that they were actually film images, and then digitized to make up the digitized sky atlas of all the NGC galaxies. So we should be able to get pretty much a one-to-one mapping of the look or appearance of the galaxies in terms of their apparent size on the screen. So let me do one more thing. I'm going to full scale this, and that's full scale, and look at that, I hadn't done this before. It's still the same size on the screen. So basically I will center it up on the actual image a little bit, and then you'll be able to see some of the factors associated with imaging on the screen, which I'll describe later. Okay, regardless of what kind of setup you have, optical or visual or imaging, the way you set up an EQ6R Skywatcher equatorial mount is you initialize the power to the unit after roughly or as accurately seeing the scope itself being lined up to the mount, making sure that your declination is reasonably matched and that your right ascension is based on alignment of the scope. Now, I've noticed for some reason it seems to have shifted a little bit off axis, and I will correct that before I go on. And the way I will do that is simply loosen up the clutch here and then shift this without affecting any of the encoder systems on the mount. So it still assumes on boot up that the scope is polar aligned, and then I can make mechanical adjustments later on using this lateral adjustment here, which basically adjusts the azimuth, and then the declination by making small adjustments to this unit right here after loosened up. So I will do that, But what I did notice last night is, boy, when I had stars on this screen, they pretty much stayed very centered for a lengthy period of time. I was impressed by that, and that's without any feedback from an off-axis guider. So we'll check that out at a later time. By the way, I had hoped this would have expanded, you know, all the way to the bottom of the screen and up, but that's just the way the cookie crumbled. Okay, finally you'll notice some other things. When the scope's not in use and you disconnect these cables, you want to be able to basically put this rigid sock over the unit because it's exposed to the air here and you will collect dust inside. That was something I noticed online when I did a little research. Finally, if you're not driving directly off AC power through a DC converter like this, and you're in a remote location, I have a battery system here that I'm using. Now I want to point out, I'm going to say kudos to my son, Christopher. He was the one that made this mount available to me because he had it at his home and he upgraded his imaging equipment with a superior mount because basically he got a Ritchie Creation 10-inch and that was a huge telescope and he needed a little more weight bearing on his scope. And when I go to the Quattro or even the Skywatcher 150 ED, all I'll really have to do is add another counterweight and rebalance everything out. All of that kind of thing I did in a much earlier video, which is probably the most popular video on Golden Phoenix published from an astronomy point of view, where I received the telescope in shipment at our home in John Day, Oregon. What I'm going to do now is sign off on this and call it part 1, because this camera has a limited amount of battery and memory storage, and the rest of the evening will be spent actually doing some alignments in astro, and I'll let you see some stars, and probably Venus, and possibly Jupiter later on. And there will be no moon, which would be nice because then I could determine the field of view. But I'm going to sign off on this now, and I'm going to say Carpe Noctem for part 1 of the new equipment that I will be using here and on the road when I do touring astronomy that I've just now presented to you, with the exception of ST80. This sweetie has been with me for over 25 years, and it will mount very nicely, hopefully, on the Quattro 6-inch Newtonian that I should be receiving before, but more likely after Christmas. So no unpackaging with a bow tie for Christmas for me, but that's perfectly fine. I will be very satisfied with its delivery. Carpe.